Colleagues, good morning again. I think we are ready to start. We have about 46 people that have joined. I think that's a good number to start. Other colleagues will join us on the way. I know colleagues from Oxfam in Africa and other Oxfam offices across the continent were wanting to join. Bongani is sorting out that and translation and things, but I think let's begin to save time. My name is Mandisa Janji. I am the Movement Building Manager for Oxfam South Africa. I am excited to be here with you today. This is an important conversation, a timely one at it. And we are just looking forward to, the conversation around the G20 and how we position ourselves as the civil society, not just civil society in South Africa, but across the continent, and how we build solidarity. There is going to be different contributions, and we'll open up space for contributions and reflections from everybody and questions. And we'll have a few reflections also from the partners that we work with that are engaging on the ground in terms of what does this moment mean for all of us, and how do we position ourselves in meaningful ways, really. This is the conversation that we are going to have today. The session will be recorded as usual. Please indicate with a thumbs up if that works for you. We are going to ask all the speakers to put on their cameras when they speak. You can keep it off when you are not talking. Translations are available for non-English speakers, and our comms team is working on the background to help and make sure that that is as smooth as possible. Please keep your microphones muted so that we can allow for a smooth engagement without any background disturbances. Yes, as I've already said, please introduce yourself in the chat. We are just happy that you are here today. This is a very important conversation and an exciting one for us as Oxfam South Africa. It's the first one for this half of the year. It's the first one in this new era for Oxfam South Africa. It's a conversation that helps us position ourselves. And I think more importantly for us, we are keen to say, how do we interpret this G20 moment on the ground, besides the conversations that are happening in boardrooms and hotels? How does it take life, on the ground for everyday people? And how do we bring voices that normally sit in the margins into the conversation? And what is our role, especially as Oxfam, in facilitating that access? And this is how we see ourselves as an organization that, lives to facilitate access for communities that we work with. When we talk about our ambition, we say we're an organization that really seeks to work with the marginalized to undo systems that perpetuate inequality and injustice and poverty. And one of the ways in which we do that is to say, how do we facilitate access to policy-making spaces, to decision-making spaces? How do we center the voices of people that are impacted, by policies that are made in high places? How do we foster the centering of those voices in conversations? And how do we allow, people's lived experiences to teach us to create better policies and to advocate for better policies in the case of Oxfam South Africa? It's an exciting one, and we are looking forward to having the conversation. I have a mandate to apologize for our board chair, who was supposed to be doing what I'm doing, the purpose of the event. She had a very last minute emergency that she had to respond to and is therefore unable to join us today. And she sends her best wishes and apologies. And we thank you in advance for your understanding in that regard. To kick us off in this conversation, we welcome our interim executive director. The last time you engaged with her, she was our programs director. But as I said, we're in a new era. We're crafting new, directions. It's exciting at Oxfam South Africa. And Nkateko happens to be at the helm, of this vehicle as we, navigate new grounds and, building and imagining new futures. And she's going to talk to us today about what does this moment mean? What does this G20 moment mean, not only for Oxfam South Africa, but for the South African civil society? And how do we position ourselves? I'm going to hand over to you, Nkateko, to speak to us about that. I'm not going to go through all the speakers at once. I'm going to be introducing them as they come in. Nkateko, leadership, over to you.
Thank you, Mandisa. Those of you who may know me, I am Nkateko Chauke. I've been in many spaces with you, from Abo, Comrade Francina, Comrade Vinola. I see you are all here. Molweni Absheni Sanbonani, Dumelang. And a special welcome as well to our colleagues from Oxfam in Africa. I'm recognizing you here. I also want to recognize colleagues from the SAF cluster, which is another wing of Oxfam as well in Southern Africa. So the continent is well represented here. I also want to recognize and welcome one of our board members who's also in the call here, Matebe Robo. Thank you for joining us, and it's true testament to show that Oxfam South Africa enjoys leadership support, particularly in the ventures and the work that we go through. So Amandla, comrades, for that. And we look forward to kicking off a process where we bring our partners along. It's a unique moment in South Africa that we are faced with right now with the hosting of the G20. This comes at a time where South Africa, the continent, and the globe is also experiencing and shock absorbing from many developments happening in the geopolitical space that are impacting the ways in which we work, that are impacting civic space as we understand it as representatives of civil society. Is the shrinking cuts to development aid as well has very much affected sectors that we work in, particularly the health sector and beyond. And so as we engage in this process, I really want to start off by recognizing that we come into it amidst difficult circumstances. The funding environment as well is impacting the level of work and engagement, representation that civil society has in these spaces. But I want to locate where we are as Oxfam for colleagues here. I also want to extend an offer to collaborate, to participate as Oxfam. As many of you may know, Oxfam is a global confederation of equals. We work across 80 countries all over the world, and we identify as a global movement of people. Our aim, our vision is to really transform systems that perpetuate poverty and inequality so that people live in dignity. And so when we say that we put feminist principles and decolonial principles at the helm of what we do, it means that we are putting front and center our values: solidarity, inclusiveness, as well as how we work with communities as well in anchoring and amplifying their voices. So I invite colleagues at every stage to engage with Oxfam's work, to engage with our values. We have 6 values, and our teams have been hard at work to socialize them across the various platforms. But that is our commitment to say, as we move forward with interventions, as we respond to global political moments, such as the responsibility that our country carries now is that we want to bring communities along. We want to be as inclusive as possible. And we're inviting you all to hold us accountable to that. And so, what does this current G20 moment mean for us as South Africa? My colleagues, I have Isobel Fryer here, who's joined us as well, will speak to our G20 strategy as we progress towards a discussion that consolidates our plans. But I wanted to highlight just the political reference, the moment where we find ourselves, and the opportunity that we have to amplify inequality as a serious problem that we need to confront, not only in South Africa, but at global level as well. And so, all the way from very cold Johannesburg, I want to get into what this moment means for us. So, South Africa takes on the presidency for the G20. It's coming in its last cycle. The G20 comes and it brings together developed economies from 20 economies across the world. And it's landing in its last cycle for the first time on African soil. So it's a true moment for us as Africans to really reflect on what are the priorities and the issues that we want the international agenda to put forward, to take forward into its continuity. So it doesn't stop. We call it a moving circus because it comes into a country for a year and it moves over to the next. Now, the issue that we are confronted with here and that we really need to think critically about is what foundations are we laying for the G20 as it moves towards the United States of America. We have seen with the recent public administration in the United States of America, with a Donald Trump presidency, that situations have become untenable. We have seen what has happened with the relations with South Africa, the relations between the US and South Africa in terms of impacts that this may have on trade relations, impact that this has had in terms of ODA funding, where the health sector has essentially been crippled. We have also seen that there is a shrinking civic space, the space for civil society to enjoy its full extension of participation is becoming smaller and smaller. And so as we think of amplifying our issues around food security, our issues around the just transition, our issues around employment creation, our issues around equitable education, our issues around unlocking much needed domestic resources, particularly in terms of the agenda and campaign that Oxfam is pushing at global level around a tax on the super rich, is really to create a space where world leaders recognize that business as usual is no longer acceptable. So I invite colleagues here to join us in our thinking and building our campaign to really emphasize the importance of centering community voices, centering community struggles, and ensuring that we are in the right spaces. I recognize as well that the G20 process is very insular. It's a very political process that in often cases keeps community participation at the margins. And so as Oxfam, we really want to clarify that our role in this process is to open up the space for civic engagement, is to open up the space to allow communities to have representation and their voices to feed into the different engagement groups. We have engaged in a process since last year to break down the process and help communities understand how this process unfolds, where are the points of entry in terms of participation. And our plan, as led by our team here, is to bring the G20 to the people through our road shows, and therefore taking those struggles back into the political process and also build a campaign that is informed by your views as well. So thank you, colleagues, for joining us here today. We look forward to engaging you further. We have all our wings from Oxfam here on the continent pledging their solidarity, opening up the space to bring in their partners from across the continent as well, for us to consolidate the African voice and African priorities. In the spirit of Ubuntu, I would wish to open this meeting and welcome you all here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nkateko, for those very important and powerful reflections. I mean, I think the question I'm taking forward from your contribution is, what are the foundations that we are laying for the G20 as it moves, to the US in the current geopolitical context? I think those are questions that we need to grapple with. I'm not going to waste any more time. I'm going to hand over to Isobel Fryer. She is our G20 Senior Policy Advisor. She is a seasoned activist. Some of you will know her from other spaces, and she's going to speak to us about really what is it that she is doing, the Oxfam confederation are doing behind the scenes in terms of the strategy, in terms of the influencing work that share what it is that we're doing and how we begin to plug into what society. Isobel, over to you.
Thank you very much. I am delighted to be able to share this. So, as Mandisa said, I joined Oxfam South Africa at the beginning of the year as a G20 Senior Policy Advisor. I, uh, when you get to my age, you don't want to say I'm an old activist. I'm a long-standing activist, as she said. I have been, I recognize you, General Moya. Hi. I have been seconded by OZA to also assist the South African government in their G20 strategy. So it's very helpful being able to straddle both the Oxfam space and the government space in their development working group, and that's been very beneficial. So the aim that I have of this is to give some quite concrete facts around the G20, and then to stimulate some thinking about the messaging that I conclude with, which is how do we make the G20 situation a possibility for solidarity that goes beyond our borders. Building a people's G20, what does this mean? And using the global moment for building a movement to end inequality in South Africa and beyond. So just starting with a short history of the G20. The G20 stands for the Group of 20. Initially, I used to think that it stood for the Government 20, and it doesn't. Group of 20 is an international forum for the leading industrialized and emerging economies. And this forum deals with global economic and financial issues. It is a central forum for economic policy coordination, and in addition to financial issues, also addresses topics such as climate change, trade, health, and the digital economy. It was founded in 1999 after the Asian financial crisis of 1997-98 as a meeting of finance ministers and central bank governors to strengthen international cooperation on finance and economic issues. Interestingly enough, the first meeting was hosted by Trevor Manuel, who was then the South African finance minister. But then we had the 2008 financial crisis, and it was very clear to everybody that the meetings of just the finance ministers had not managed to prevent another global financial crisis. And so the idea of the G20 was born with an inclusion of a summit of the heads of states and government. So the first meeting was in Washington in 2008, and that introduced the two-track finance track and the Sherpa track. So the Sherpa track is the development track. That's where most organizations such as Oxfam engage with. It is built to deal with development issues, but it's also an encouraging space for engagement. Whereas the finance track, which deals with tax and trade and things like that, is very closed. So the initial idea of the finance ministers thinking that they really were the most important in this discussion, despite the fact that they failed to prevent the 2008 financial crisis, that level of arrogance and domination of the money people, which is about money and not about development, continues. So to refer to what Nkateko was saying, we're coming to the end of the first 20 years, the first cycle of presidencies of the G20. So South Africa is the last one, and it goes back to the new cycle. And again, it was assumed that, well, it was announced that the US would be the next presidency, would hold the next presidency, but there are big questions given what President Trump, his position on multilateralism, which is really that he doesn't see much point for it. And the question then remains, what is the future of the G20? And that puts an even greater responsibility on this current G20 presidency to ensure that we leave a binding legacy. So again, just to go back to the format, the formal makeup and DNA of the G20. So together, the G20 countries represent about 85% of global GDP, over 75% of global trade, and 2/3 of the world's populations. So it's both elitist, but it's also significant. And that leads to the criticisms of the G20, which include the lack of binding force. So it's not an official international body, but an informal forum, notwithstanding what leaders announce at the Leaders Summit, it's not enforceable. And also, and this is something that governments are trying to address, is that there's no real tracking as to what the commitments are and what's being done. And OZA as well, on behalf of civil society, we're starting a process of developing a G20 tracking, which will be inclusive, and I think we might refer to later on in the day of ways in which people can get involved in tracking from the grassroots up to the global. In addition to that, by the very name G20, it's obvious that it's incredibly exclusionary. So only 19 countries and the EU, and only recently from 2023, the AU, come together to decide on global economic issues. And obviously, smaller countries are excluded from that. So the G20, as I said, consists of the 19 countries. That has industrialized countries, which includes the US, Canada, Germany, France, Italy, Great Britain, Japan, Australia, South Korea. Emerging economies, so it has China and Russia and Brazil and India and South Africa. So BRICS is there. Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Argentina. And as I've mentioned, since 2023, the AU and the EU. It also has representation of international development bodies, such as the ILO, the International Labour Organization, UNICEF, so those which are sort of dominantly located in the global north. I have to say, having sat in on negotiations for the Development Working Group, so I'm not allowed to say what is being negotiated, but it is fascinating as you begin to learn which countries are going to raise certain things. So there's certain countries, especially in the emerging economies, that, for instance, are not happy to have gender mentioned or human rights mentioned. If you're talking about realizing Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development Goals, and countries such as, for instance, potentially Argentina, reject the Agenda 2030, you can imagine that the problem with negotiations and coming together with a consensus is that you start watering down the high-level principled asks in order to get consensus. So that's one of the dangers of this framing. So that's just a very brief introduction to what the G20 is. And of course, we talk about it being a South African and the African G20, but we also know that we are representing, that the G20 is reflective of all members. So we have the privilege of hosting and we set the agenda, but it has to be agreed to by all the member states that are there. So for Oxfam, we look at 2025 as being a significant year because there are a number of global processes. We have the G20. There's also the Financing for Development 4 conference, which is happening at the end of this month in Spain. That happens every 10 years. And given the announcements of withdrawals and reductions of overseas development aid from many of the countries in the global north, the question of where the financing comes from is very, very topical. And so we see that is a space in which we need to draw alignment between the G20 and FFD, and also COP30, of course, on climate justice and just energy transitions. That's in November in Brazil. And the the WSSD, the World Summit on Sustainable Development, is also happening in November. So looking at the priorities that Oxfam has for this G20, we came face to face in February, at the beginning of the year in Johannesburg. And these are confederation-wide priorities, which also house OZA's own priorities to a large degree. So the first one is inequality, and that is something which we're totally committed to, as the rest of today will unfold. Then there is the coalition of the willing, and I'll explain what that is in the coming slide. Tax the super rich, which is essential for us. It's a way of tackling inequality to tax the super rich, also a way of supplying finance which is independent of the global north. But we find that there are many obstacles because of the elite compacts between the political elites and the financial elites, which work towards reducing the ability of countries to tax. Then looking at debt and the ways in which we can reduce the huge impact that debt has on developing countries in terms of their own sovereign policies. And finally, the climate and just energy justice, which are the agendas of looking at how we reduce the impact of climate crises. We've just seen the tragedy in the Eastern Cape of extreme weather, and that's happening more and more. How do we both look at adaptation mitigation, also through loss and damage, make the polluters pay for countries in the developing world, which are not the main source of polluters. So the middle column there just shows that there are process overlaps for Oxfam's priorities with the G20 COP and WSSD. The key moments in the last column for the G20, on the 1st of December 2024, South Africa assumed the presidency of the G20 for a year. Between 22 and 23 November this year, there is the Leaders Summit, which leads to a Leaders Declaration, which is what all the working groups are working towards. And then on the 1st of December 2025, the presidency of the G20 looks set to be given to the US. So just again, trying to make sure that we explain a bit more about our priorities. So in terms of inequality, Oxfam's been working very closely with the South African government to set up an extraordinary committee for this year's G20 of global experts to look at a report on inequality, which demonstrates the dangers of unfettered inequality. We look to the rise of oligarchy, we look to the reduction of available resources for public benefit. So this should be announced by the South African president in coming days under the chairship of Professor Stiglitz. And the rest of the committee are made up of extraordinary women who are economists and experts from across the country, from across the world. And South Africa's has Dr. Wanga Zembe, who will be part of that extraordinary committee. So that's something which Oxfam has done through the influencing alongside the Sherpa and the president. And we believe that that's a critical contribution given the geopolitical crisis of the world, which is formed so greatly by inequality. Within Oxfam, the Confederation, and also OZA, we're releasing inequality reports this year across the year. And that will be for us as OZA building our End Inequality Now campaign, which will dovetail with the 2025 G20. And we hope that our members and partners will be central to how we expand that campaign. Coalition of the Willing. Mandisa, you must tell me when I'm running short of time. As a result of the attacks on multilateralism and on civic space that Nkateko spoke about in her introduction, there are a number of countries, of progressive countries, where the global leaders have come together and are trying to challenge the domination of the global north, and the oligarchic dismantling of multilateralism, but not just going back to as it was, but building a new multilateralism with a South-South axis. So we are supporting the work to have the South African government part of this coalition of the willing, together with the Brazilian government, and also Spain, although it is technically in the global north, it aligns very much with the global south. And so the Financing for Development conference coming up at the end of the month is a very key part where the political leaders are coming up and saying, we want to rebuild a better world, and not to be bullied by the oligarchy of President Trump and Argentina and other such powers. The third one, tax the super rich, I've mentioned, and that'll be part of the Financing for Development agenda of Oxfam. Here in South Africa, we were part of the Tax the Super Rich campaign meeting last month, together with AIDC and Friedrich Ebert Stiftung and the trade union movement. So that's really important for us to start calling for the taxation of the super rich. We saw the Minister of Finance taxing not the super rich, but wanting to tax the poor through the VAT increase, which was successfully defeated by progressive civil society. But we do need to look to the future. As the most unequal country in the world, we need to be ensuring that the super rich and the rich are taxed. And then also getting the rich to pay for public provision of human rights. That's a crucial part. Which takes me to point 4, which is debt. We've seen the common framework on debt, which was introduced in the G20. Really, the real problem on this is that because of the demise of public money, development is now being financed more and more by loans, which are made either by finance banks or by private investors. If you are a developing country, you pay much higher interest rates for that debt. And so South Africa under President Thabo Mbeki set up the Cost of Capital Commission under this G20, which is saying if we are going to borrow as developing South or developing countries in the global South, we actually need equal terms, if not better terms, because we're looking at a far greater need. But ultimately, we also want the money not to come from debt, but to come from taxation of the resources of our countries. And then climate and just energy justice. So within OZA, we're looking particularly at energy and gender and just energy, and we're having a couple of side events looking at that. And then through loss and damage, building towards COP30, which is something which Nkateko is leading. Working with the G20, we have 2 tracks, one known as the insider track and one known as the outsider track. So the insider track is really working within or alongside the G20 and the engagement groups. The outsider track is us working as part of social movements to put political pressure to bear, but not necessarily to put it onto G20, but to use this moment to advance our political agenda. Insider track within Oxfam Confederation, 2 of us are embedded in working groups, the health working group and the development working group, which is quite unique to South Africa. Other G20s don't allow civil society people into the working groups, but that's also attests to the trust that government has in Oxfam and the work that we've done in the past with and for government, particularly around the vaccines. The Extraordinary Committee on Global Wealth Inequality I've mentioned. OZA is working on engagement groups, the C20, the T20, which is Think Tank 20, the Women's 20, the Y20, Interfaith 20, the Foundations 20, Values 20, and Labour 20. And we could talk about this as the day progresses. As I mentioned, under the Think Tank 20, OZA is hosting a number of side events, including on gender and just energy, as well as African women in mining and agriculture. And I know that Nkateko has had some discussions with the leadership of the G20 around the social summit. And then on the outsider track, roadshows and community engagements, which this one is kicking off. also building Tax the Super Rich campaign, as I mentioned, working, and this is where a lot of our energy is going towards the People's Summit, which is an alternative social movement summit, not a government initiative, but really activists and social movements under a banner of Fight Inequality Alliance, OZA, and a number of other organizations and partners who are represented here. We're also working with a New Economy Hub on something called Conversations for a New Economy, which is really going beyond the orthodox views of economy and looking at a feminist and ecological new economy. And then, of course, our media and comms team are doing work on social and traditional media. So I've got two more slides. So we see this as a strategy in 3 phases. To some degree, we do want to shape the leaders' declaration narrative around inequality in the coalition of the willing. Not to some degree. We definitely want to shape that. We want to ensure that the world, through the Inequality Committee that we've helped set up, says that no longer is inequality okay. That it's called for the crisis that it is, and through the coalition of the willing and other formations, we seriously embrace policy changes which dismantle levels of inequality. So we see this as a golden thread, inequality from financing for development to WSSD, COP30, and the G20. And we'd also open spaces with partners just to make sure that that golden thread is something which can be owned by many people beyond Oxfam. And building on the high-level commitment which we hope to see in Seville between progressive governments from the global south and north to advance a global agenda or initiative with 2 main objectives: fighting inequality and defending or building a new multilateralism. And so I've mentioned the Leaders' Declaration, which will come out of the Leaders' Summit on the 22nd and 23rd of November. This People's Summit will be on the same dates. Questions that we have is, how do we shape the narrative around human rights, equality, and development? And how do we proclaim the stories from the ground? And then my final slide is, why is solidarity beyond the South African G20 so important? So here I've just identified critical spaces. Firstly, of course, the continent. So Africa and the AU as a critical power bloc, having recently joined the G20, but is an ongoing one. And Oxfam in Africa works very closely with the AU. We look to this as a source of development financing on more equitable grounds. And I've mentioned the Cost of Capital Commission of South Africa, G20 Presidency under President Thabo Mbeki. The Africa Group at the UN introduced a critical UN tax convention to forward fairer tax systems and to reduce the resource stripping of Africa, where the minerals get taken out of Africa by companies that are listed on New York and London stock exchanges, and the tax is raised in those jurisdictions and not Africa. We also know the BRICS alignment is crucial, and it raises many uncomfortable responses by the traditional powers because it challenges the dominance of the neo-colonial powers. It has the 2 largest nations, India and China, part of it. And we know that there are a number of non-aligned countries who are clamoring to join the BRICS. And I think that that's something which we need as civil society, not only to be monitoring, but to be working alongside. And then finally, the coalition of the willing. As I've mentioned, this is a key space for our countries as political heads of state to step up to and to own. So it's not something which we come along after the agenda has been set, but we set the agenda. So thank you very much, Mandisa, for the time. Apologies for my technical ignorance. I found another slide, which is the most important tool is building people's power and advancing key ways in which principles affect and shape daily life, such as energy. The example there that was the energy poverty that exists and how women are most affected. So the dangers and time of collecting firewood versus solar energy for cooking and irrigation. We need new markets for our goods within the continent and beyond. And that is why the solidarity that is built in this moment needs to reach way beyond the 19 countries and the moments of the 2024 G20. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel. Thank you for those very
Are you
important.
laughing at my technical inability? We don't have to answer that, but thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I guess we will engage as we move forward. Colleagues, I'm not going to do my summaries anymore to save time. We move forward to another seasoned activist and a comrade who's been in the sector for a long time and brings a lot of expertise into this conversation. Comrade Mazibuko Chaha, who is the executive director of the Zabalaza Pathways Institute, to talk to us about what meaningful engagement means really for the G20 movement and how we begin to, make that a reality at community level, at grassroots level. And we tap into his wisdom because this is the work that he's been doing for the longest time. Comrade Mazibuko, over to you, leader.
Good morning, Comrade Mandis. Good morning, comrades. So this is my first Oxfam event since I stepped down as the founding board chair of Oxfam. I just wanted to make that claim to fame. Um, uh, a lot of what Isabel's excellent presentation covers is the material that speaks to the question you've asked me to speak to. The question of meaningful engagement is clearly at the center of what the OZA strategy has been about, all the various proposals that Isabel has put forward. So what I'll do is to add to that. The first thing that's critical for us is the need for a sovereign development project. Any of the countries in the world that engage in multilateral institutions have to have that. Without that, we risk being incorporated into skewed global structures where we can be presented for show, but not for meaningful change. So a sovereign development project about the country defining its development needs, defining the agenda, strategy, and program of action to realize those development needs. And often this has to do with industrial development, it has to do with the provision of public goods, and all of that requires a fair trade regime. So the balancing out of various inequalities in the global economic system. So we should, as the presentation shows, we should not go into these processes assuming the largesse, the generosity of the rich and powerful countries. We must go there to assert our agenda. Often, when we do not do that, we find civil society organizations, movements, trade unions, and so on being incorporated into problematic processes where then they struggle to define what this sovereign development agenda is. So that's a crucial principle. The second issue I want to raise with regards to enriching our approach to participation from below has to do with how we connect these global processes with our own national processes. In the case of South Africa, we have the upcoming national dialogue. So both the national dialogue and the G20 are political moments where we can push the progressive agenda for change quite hard and quite strategically. So, for example, the notion of taxing the rich has moved to the center of global economic debate. Whereas several decades ago, that notion would have been dismissed and relegated to a notion of a few on the left. A strategic moment being used consistently over time becomes critical, such that then particular notions enter these spaces. But as they enter these spaces, what we must also remember is that they can be used to block off more radical change that is required. So, whilst it is an achievement to grab these political moments and use them strategically, we must then go back to our own countries, resolve political and economic questions at that level. So the struggle doesn't end just with us pushing at the level of the G20 or other such processes. I think it's very clear to us, for example, outcomes the people that Israel refers to will have implications for ongoing how we pressure our own government, or how we pressure international institutions. So, what putting forward with this standpoint is the importance of the global political moment, but also in the South African case, the national political moment through the national dialogue. And then I think what is put forward can contribute to consolidating that. The question for us, are we thinking sufficiently in a strategic way to connect the two, the national dialogue and the process? And I think there's still a lot of work to do. The fact that President Ramaphosa announced that national dialogue this very week, then gives some impetus then to the notion I'm talking about. The importance of the planned community dialogue is so crucial. But it must not be dialogues that demobilize, that place people at the point of merely presenting a list of complaints. I think it should be dialogue frame, a way of saying, let's generate solutions from below. Already, people who are acting on justice front, on ecological justice, are already advancing popular alternatives from below. Now, the question is, how do we sustain alternatives such that they can constitute an alternative political and economic current in this country, and of course, many other countries, but also many of the public good, many of the democratic rights, many of the economic development opportunities that we demand, that we must benefit from, are actually realized in actual policy. That's where then the question of ongoing struggle comes in. Because if these community dialogues are just about making submissions an elite kind that is defined, then we'll be putting our strategy. So, in other words, what I'm calling for is community dialogues that in character, getting people into action, but also not just action to protest, but also action to put forward alternative perspectives. That's why I started with reference to the need for a sovereign development project. In other words, a people's sovereign development project driven from below, such that actually we imprint our agenda on what those who are ruling politically, but also those who control the economy can feel the breath below. In the case of South Africa, we already have a good vision of what a good society should look like in the form of the country's constitution, and in my view, in light of the two events, but also in light of the fact that the constitution turns 30 next year, I think we're really movement to regalvanize society, because otherwise these community dialogues can end up just being another layer of incorporating people into meaning talk. I think we can, if we drive things in a radical direction, really rebuild trust, we can regalvanize society to claim the process, to claim the space. Um, so this really is about building autonomous platforms, autonomous spaces on an ongoing basis. Let us not imagine that the G20 summit or the national dialogue will be the end. I think we really need to use the moment to define a new agenda, a new strategy, and to really get people organized properly on the range of issues. What is critical in this is that also it is a moment to learn, it is a moment to educate, it is a moment for literacy, particularly on the economy, how this global economy works, who it excludes, who it includes. Similarly, how the South African economy works, who it includes, who it excludes, and what our alternative vision is, and what can we learn from existing efforts at livelihoods, whether it was from the COVID moment, whether it is the ongoing hustle people are facing, and how these need to be transformed as part of changing the economy in a significant way. The message of tax the rich, whilst global, it is accepted. In South Africa, you still have a significant uh, uh, part of discourse being shaped by the rich. For the statement this week by the CEO of Capitec that unemployment could be as low as 10% if we take the informants into account, is the kind of insensitivity and distance from employment that the rich in this country can feel comfortable to say such statements. So that underlines how we really need to turn on the pressure using the moment of the G20 and the national dialogue to really push hard the question of taking the rich, but also other forms of redistribution, whether it is assets, whether it is land, and so on. And in this regard, our constitution is not a barrier at all. It actually opens the doors. But we as ordinary people allowed the state not to drive the radical constitution, not to be accountable, and basically to allow the dominant ideas of neoliberalism to shape that. So I think a part of our community engagement here to ensure we really radicalize economic literacy at the level of grassroots communities, get the people really back to their own radical self about how the economy must look like. So for me, meaningful community is really to undo the ideological damage about how we understand how much respect we have for Rupert or for Mutsipi, how we should really be turning, if we're using guns, I would say turning the bullets in that direction. But of course, what we are talking about here is our mass power, but also our power to generate alternatives. For me, comrades, I don't have to repeat what Isobel said about the various processes committee of the People Summit, of the inside outside track. I think those are all critical. The last point I want to mention is about overall how we understand the state, because ultimately, after the leaders are gone, after the summit, after the national dialogue closes, we will still be faced with a state that is critical for implementing many of those decisions. And in this regard, I want us to think of and feel like with the state, beyond the state, and against the state. And often all of those three elements, all people are actually practicing. With the state, insofar it is a legitimate state, it is a constitutional foundation. In that constitution, there are also clear obligations, clear mandates, clear duties and responsibilities of the state. We need to heighten pressure in that regard so that the state can actually be pushed far further than it has been. Beyond the state, insofar as we know that there are things that the state is never willing to consider, partly because of its positioning, deliberate positioning in the global system, where it has opted to basically be an agent of neoliberalism. Of course, the state is contested, but that contestation must not mean we throw all our baskets in the egg of the state. So for doing with just transition where shows that there are things the state can't imagine. If you go back to when the state wanted to pass a series of laws on how to govern seeds, which we need to produce our food, basically those seed bills were handing over seed control to private companies instead of saying people must be able to have to build their food sovereignty. So that's when then people's seed banks makes sense when we go beyond the state. We need to take that logic of going beyond the state, even in the economy. Why have we not occupied the factories that have closed? Why have we not turned those factories that have closed into new entities that can create jobs controlled by workers and communities? That's an example of going beyond the state, which we really need to sustain beyond the summits. And then other elements will be against the state, whether we take the state on the streets, whether we take the state in the courts. But in my view, these three elements, beyond and against, go together. They are not separate, which I think also is the kind of logic which Isabel was speaking to. So for me, if we take community engagement from the perspective I've put forward, I think we'll begin to transform and get people to trust the political process, but also get people to unleash their energy in a transformative way, such that they can actually now rise again in a way that forms the country in a significant way. Thank you, comrades. I hope it's useful to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Comrade Mazibuko. That was very helpful in terms of grounding us with regards to what meaningful participation means. I mean, very importantly, at least for me, I think is the thing that the concept that you closed with, to say, there are different ways in which we need to be engaging the state, engaging with the state, engaging beyond the state, and engaging against the state where necessary, but also cautioning us to say, what, we must enter these spaces not really assuming the generosity of the rich and powerful, but to assert our own agenda, and that, the language of activism can be co-opted and stolen, and we need to not be excited but engage strategically, even when the things that we've been fighting for begin to take center stage. What does that mean? Is that a win? Is it a co-opting of our language to pacify us? So thank you so much for those very important and helpful reflections from your side. And now we are going to move to the next presenter and the last presenter for this session. I think Kateko said in the beginning that we are part of a big confederation, a global one, and that we want to position this G20 not only as a South African moment, but as a moment for the African continent. And so we were very intentional about building solidarity beyond South African borders. And one of our colleagues from Oxfam in Africa, his name is Kwesi Obeng. He's going to talk to us about building solidarity in Africa beyond the G20 moment. And I think that builds really on the conversation that has been happening throughout this morning. Kwesi is the governance and is the accountable governance lead. Forgive me, comrades. He is the accountable governance lead for Oxfam in Africa. You are welcome to put your camera on, Kwesi, and take us through your presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you very much. And I think right from the beginning, you've set a tone for this. I think a number of things. One is that, and I think it's been emphasized by all the speakers, this is a golden moment. Never mind the crisis in the global political, geopolitical environment around. But I think that for Africa, this is a very important moment. And there was a point referenced by Isabel. So given the fact that Africa is now part of the G20, and it's very interesting because in the lead up to this, Africa has been able to build a certain momentum to get the UN to really accede to something that civil society have been fighting for the past 10 years, since the last FFD in Addis Ababa, that is acceding to the need for us to have a UN tax body, more or less, a UN tax convention. So I do think that Africa has something to offer. We have something to offer to ourselves and the rest of the world. And so I think this is really a good opportunity, and also having the AU as the 21st member for us as citizens of the continent to come together and highlight what it is that Africa ought to get out of this place, and the kind of momentum that needs to inform global policy making spaces. Two important things I think it's worth noting. If you look at the G20 in Brazil, it was successful, but Latin America has a particular fragmentation that we don't have in Africa, in terms of the divide between those aligned to, say, the OECD countries and those aligned to the global south, like Brazil and the like. We don't have that division. So I do think that it offers us also, as citizens of Africa, who don't have the same fragmentation that LAC had or has, to really come together and amplify the voices of our leaders, even as they seek to champion. And one of the things, again, Isabel referred to is how SA presidency is seeking to push for a review of the common framework on debt. for example. I think Brazil succeeded in getting the leaders to agree on the lessons learned and what needs to be done. But I think SA presidency is seeking to actually push even the envelope further. And I think that it's important because there are other processes that are happening, as again referred to by both by the other speakers, around the FFD process ongoing, the climate change conversations, the UN Tax Convention, and the WSSD meetings. But beyond these, I mean, I think the way to also locate it is that the way global policy making works is that different parts of the engine works at different paces, but in the end, they come together to form what might be classified as a single norm. And so I think that, and given the power that the G20 has to influence particularly global economic policy making, I think it's really an important moment for us to, as the last speaker said, to regroup and to shape how things evolve from here, and even more so to inform a future development of the agenda of the G20. The other thing I wanted to point out is just the thing that has been emphasized here many times, the crisis of inequality. I mean, I think that everybody today now understands that inequality is a global crisis. But we do understand that it has an African face, by and large, with the rise of China and in India. And the African Union, for example, just last year, just before it was admitted into the G20 to the table, planned or has agreed a target around to reduce inequality by 15%. Now, it cannot do this without some of the changes that the SA presidency is seeking to. And I think that one of the ways we can support is for us, even as citizens, to actually mobilize behind this initiative, but also beyond this, to be engaged in other processes like the FFD and then also the UN Tax Convention, and even the debt campaigns that are emerging in the continent, but then also globally, to connect with and to ensure the need and the power, harness our power to push back. One thing we're quite clear about is that many of our partners on the continent are really looking forward to, one Africa working together to push some of these issues. I think for a long time we've always complained that our leaders have not been working together, and I think we are beginning to see signs of our leaders working together. And I think the SA's presidency shows the strength in working together as Africa and connecting to other spaces to influence them to inure to our benefit as Africans and by and large the global South. And so I think that we can leverage on the solidarity that was built from Brazil to build on, given the fact that the American presidency is going to be difficult to influence given the post-truth era that we find ourselves, and just also the whole torpedoing of the international norms in terms of relations between states and also between states and citizens. Lastly, one thing I think I want to talk about, and that was something that I think Nkateko referred to, the increasing pressure on civic space. I think if you add the increasing pressure on civic space, the decline, more or less linked to a decline in democratic values, and then also the oppressive inequality levels within our countries, and then also between the North and the South, and the worsening pace of this, and the debt crisis and how the global north continues to benefit from the indebtedness of countries in the south. I think that we do have an opportunity to shape the norm using the UN Tax Convention conversations, for example, to look back to why we need to have, for example, what some of our partners have been pushing for and to which we actually support, a need for us to begin to think around a global body on debt. It's not palatable to the north, but it's something that I think we should refract in building solidarity beyond the G20. That post G20, that's something that we could really put our energies together. So I think essentially the point I'm trying to make is that there are existing spaces, including what we see on the horizon, that we could build the energies around the G20 to feed into beyond the G20 and to tap into some of the ideas floated by our brother in the last submission, to mobilize ourselves to influence both local, but then also in global processes and policies regarding economic development globally, but more importantly in the global south in our part of the world. So the last thing I probably should just add is that I think we do have a goodwill at the African Union as civil society. And this is an opportunity for us to really work together with them and also with the SA presidency to move the needle as far as we can this time around, given that it might take several decades for us to host another G20 presidency. It probably won't happen in our lifetime. Thank you very much, Mandisa.
Thank you so much, Gracie. Appreciate your very important inputs there, really emphasizing, I think, a point that was made earlier, I think, by Isabel, to say maybe we shouldn't think about the G20 moment in isolation, but how do we link that to other important global policy-making spaces such as, COP and the FFD, but also imploring us to say it's time to regroup, right? It's time to regroup, leverage on the solidarity that was built in Brazil to inform how the G20 moves forward from now on, also considering that it might take a different shape as it moves to the US. Thank you so much, Gracie, for those very important contributions. Now we get to, I think, an important aspect of this event where we open up for questions and reflections. I want to ask us that some of the questions, we might not get to every question, but please write them on the chat. And I want to ask the OZA team to please engage with the questions that we can answer on the chat. So Nkateko, Isobel, Livsin, please, all those questions that we can answer, please let's answer them. But I'm going to invite you, comrades, to register your questions now in this moment. I'm going to take, I think, 4 right now, and then allow the panelists to respond. Please keep your questions as short and to the point as possible, and your reflections. Thank you so much. We'll take a few hands.
Thank you, honorable comrades. It's a great honor, and thank you for hosting us. It's a reflection after such a very insightful engagement that we're having, that, there's something that was raised that we need to go beyond, because as civil society, we are always called at the last time, but we are the ones that are experiencing all the challenges currently as civil societies. And also to express my sincere condolences for the loss of life of families that have lost their children and their homes in the province of the Eastern Cape. It's really a sad moment that we're having as South Africa, that as we're engaging to look at the G20, then there's also challenges that we are facing with climate change and also loss of life, loss of goods for farmers. So I really want to reflect that as we move on can we also look at how we address these issues when the G20 is sitting there? How do we now do the restoration of what is currently happening? Because you've raised issues of how do we tax the rich, but we still have the challenges of the debt as a continent that we need to deal with. And Ubaba Mazibuko raised a very important thing, that there will be a meeting. After the meeting, what happens? And we need to come up with strategies to say, when the meeting is over, what happens to the continent? Because we need to move as a continent to say, how do we move to be self-sufficient, self-sustaining, and also trading amongst ourselves to get to a point where we reduce the debts that we're having, and also address the gender inequalities that we are facing as a continent. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come to you, Dr. Jeanette, and then Pastor Lebu. It's going to be those three hands that I can see.
Revolutionary greetings and good day to everyone. Good evening, good morning, wherever you are. Thank you so much to our panelists for such very simplified and comprehensive, articulation of the concept of G20, especially given the fact that I guess at times as communities, or though the grassroots tend to kind of distance themselves from certain processes, given perhaps the magnitude of which they're actually projected, particularly from that global perspective. But how it has been unfolding so far through these conversations, I'm telling you, I must admit, I think it's quite simplified and also encouraging, I guess, to the grassroots to say, oh, this is not just about the government. I'm glad that actually Isobel actually demystified the G in the G20. Even myself personally, I used to just confuse it with the G20, the government 20. Whenever I see the G20, I don't think about group of 20. So I think this is very, very critical. And given the mandate of the Oxfam South Africa, this is exactly what we mean by grassroots and, having really practical actions from below. So just not to take much of everyone's time, I guess the issue here for me is around the problematization of AU versus G20 as South Africa. I'm glad that for the first time I'm hearing that there are some processes around having the AU becoming the 21st member. But now where is South Africa located in terms of our solidarity as a continent? I mean, just yesterday, I was watching this particular very disturbing, clip that was on social media around this confusion around countries in Maghreb, like even Egypt, where somebody felt like Egypt is not part of Africa. So I'm also responding to the question that I think Kwesi, you have actually acknowledged that at least Africa, we are not fragmented. So how do we make sure that we bring every voice, everyone on board in this particular moment when South Africa is chairing the G20, ensure that civil society from all over Africa comes on board without really alienating themselves, thinking it's a South African project or it's a South African moment. So I guess those are some of the critical issues that we really need to do in our mobilization and advocacy work around this particular matter. Then quickly, the insider-outsider track, I guess it needs further simplifying, because for me, it might cause some disjuncture at some point. I must admit that vast experience in research, particularly working with grassroots communities and civil society, civil society to some extent gets actually fragmented and, just simply because of the issues of power relations or who is going to be heard first. Because the moment when we say the other G, the insider track is aligned to the government, and then we have the outsider tracks, we need to really give some kind of confidence to communities to really feel that whatever they're going to contribute through the outsider tribes still gets relevance and audience on the main G20 processes.
Thank you, Dr. Janet. Pastor Lebu, please go ahead, and then we take answers.
So, sorry, Mandisa, I have now the critical question that talks to content. I noted what we want to do and what Her Royal Highness has just alluded to, the crisis in Cape right now. I haven't seen any particular output or outcome that is really grounded or concrete, expectation or outcome that speaks to climate and just energy transition, particularly from a feminist standpoint, like, for example, the aspects of energy poverty and all those kind of things. My heartfelt condolences to those who lost their lives in Eastern Cape, because these are the African-specific issues that we really need to ground in our policy making. Thank you so much. Sorry about that for taking longer. Over
Thank
to
you,
you,
Dr.
Chair.
Janet. Thank you so much. Pastor Lebu, please come in quickly, and then we will take responses. And maybe in Nkateko, in your response, you can speak to what we are doing in Tata.
Thank you, beloved.
Pastor Lebu, go ahead. Thanks.
Thank you. I greet you all in the wonderful name of our Lord Jesus Savior. I just want to find out of this G20, the grassroots inclusion, since I'm residing in the rural marginalized communities. I just want to ensure that the processes, the rural and grassroots communities are not only consulted, but also shaping policy outcomes. Can you give concrete examples of such participants? Another question is going to be on funding equity. What funding mechanisms are being proposed within G20 frameworks to support small community-led organization, especially those working with women, youth, and people with disability in undeveloped areas? And the last one is going to be on local accountability. We are mostly in rural marginalized community within the G20 civil society and implement G20 commitments and the currency and local accountability. Why to say no?
Thank you, Pastor Lebu. We note those questions. I'm going to invite the panelists to please respond. Maybe I'll tap on you first, Nkateko.
Hi, Manisa. Could you connect Isabel first on the substantive questions, particularly the ones coming from Dr. J, and then she could also touch on, broader clarity on the insider-outsider track engagements, and also a rehash of the G20. So just to touch on the role of the government and how it works, the whole point around advocacy to unlock funding is why we are engaging the process to really challenge governments to unlock much needed financing. If you were following the news yesterday, Oxfam South Africa was also really putting the government on the hot spot to say, the kind of response actions that we see to mitigate against a climate catastrophe are quite slow and considerably not enough. So how are we thinking and pushing the government to avail these resources to allow communities to be first-line responders? So the G20 is essentially a process that allows us to advocate for these critical issues. And it's a step-at-a-time issue. We've made considerable progress in terms of getting to where we are now, when there is actually a debate around taxing the super rich. And the whole point about taxing the super rich is to say, we need to mobilize domestic resources in our countries. The top 5 billionaires in South Africa, for example, need to contribute a fair share of their taxes so that that money translates into development outcomes, such as health, education, climate action, etc. So G20 is really a space for advocacy. It's a space to make sure that as world leaders negotiate and talk about the priorities of the world at this point in time, that they are including some of those hard-hitting issues. I also want to end by saying that the G20 is not an enforcement mechanism. They cannot in any way come out with their declaration and then implement. The implementation structures sit in, and Isobel mentioned this earlier on, UN processes. For example, if we are advocating for climate finance to be released and made available, and particularly available for directly for communities, where that happens is in the UNFCCC process with COP30 happening in Brazil. So that's where then they will take whatever came out from the leaders' declaration from a G20 and then unpack it in the COP negotiations to then come up with an implementation framework. So it's good to understand that the G20 is not standing in isolation. It's a process that begins to put in priorities into the pot for various then convenings and platforms to take them on. The same for financing for development, which is happening in Seville now in June, is where it's going to say, how do we put into practice the UN Convention on Tax, for example? What are the things that we need to include in the text that help us make sure that it's practically implementable at state levels? Because all the countries are bound by commitments and declarations that they sign on to. South Africa has signed on to the Paris Agreement. That means anything that comes out of the COP, they have to then domesticate and implement. So these are the kind of examples I want to share, that when we see the G20, let's look at the G20 as a space to influence the priorities that can then be implemented at the relevant levels. So Isobel, I'll invite you to come in and maybe tackle some of the substantive questions from Dr. J. And others. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity and for the questions. I also just want to commend Comrade Jacha and Kwezi for their presentations as well. I think the provocations, but also the insights are definitely ones that will aid us as we try and negotiate these complex spaces. I think, Comrade Janet, the question of gender and just energy led me to, it's always good when you don't finish all your points in your own presentation, just to reflect on the progress around the C20. So the C20 is the Civil Society 20, and that has historically been the space where, I think it's actually the Civil 20, but it's where civil society has the ability to engage through processes and structures, identifying topics, and the work done in C20 working groups then is able to be fed into the final leaders' declaration. Now, we all know that there was some problems around the leadership of the C20 at the beginning of the year. As Oxfam, we had initially thought that we would aid the process in being within the leadership troika, but we realized that that wasn't actually true to our mandate, which is working on the outsider track as well as the insider track. And as a result of that, we spoke to our two partners, Economic Justice Network and Afrodad, and said that we would not feel comfortable in that position. However, there was another group of organizations who were also wanting to lead and take that up. So the long and short of it is that it is delayed, but the good news is that the C20 process is being undertaken, particularly on the energy and climate change. Mandisa, can you pop into the chat just for people who are interested, details of who to contact for the climate energy Climate and Energy Working Group for the C20. And I think we can also just share with all participants here the processes by which people can get engaged with a working group. So that is something which can come out of this partners engagement, is to say that as of this week, I think the working groups are open, and that would be quite a constructive space for the truths and the stories and the experiences and the concerns and the solutions that people have to come through into the G20 process. The question around the People's Summit, is that a new name for the G20 Social Summit? So last year, as I understand, I'm new to the G20 process, Brazilian government held a G20 social summit, which was an endeavor to bring together all people who'd been involved with the G20, not just in the strict working groups. That is going to be held again this year, and I know that a month or so again, government was looking at some eminent people to lead that process. But no, the People's Summit is a social movement collection, which is going to happen at Constitutional Hill at the same days, on the same dates as the Leaders Summit. So the G20 Social Summit will happen before the G20 Leaders meeting, but the People's Summit is going to happen at the same time. It is our space. There will be music, there'll be poetry, there'll be demands, there'll be celebration, and that's our space. How people can get involved with that is through the process which is being headed by Fight Inequality Alliance. We can share access to the information around that as well. It's still very early days, and we're just having meetings not meetings about meetings, I promise you, but meetings to plan what we want to do in terms of building up towards that space. So the reason that this partnership meeting is happening now is that a number of these initiatives people were talking about them, but they weren't happening. Now, in the last 2 weeks, they've been concretized. And so that's why we're wanting to share it with colleagues and comrades. And the financing, absolutely, Nkateko covered that. The point is that our government, I mentioned the assault on the poor through the proposed VAT increase. Our government's following austerity budgeting. It's a very old-fashioned approach at saying that we're going to just take care of what we have. We're not going to expand. Unless our economy grows, as we know, unless government actually starts putting money into public services, into healthcare, into education, into social grants, if government doesn't release the money into our lives and our livelihoods, we won't see growth. And instead of saying that the private sector can take out more and more through cutting taxes, we need to be saying, increase the taxes. Corporate taxes are half what they were under apartheid. The state used taxes to build a whole apartheid state. We need to be building our democratic sovereign state that Mazibuko was referring to through taxation in order to build it's not even the future, the reality that the Constitution promises each of us. Again, 30 years next year of the Constitution, does that put bread on our tables? It should. It's the tool to do so. So after the meetings in November, after the summits in November, let's build the kinds of social movements that we need to seek that transformation. And part and parcel of that, OZA's contribution will be in promoting the End Inequality Now campaign, which we hope that all our partners will join up on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isabel. Comrade Mazibuko, any reflections from your side? And then we come to Kwesi.
Sorry for the delay. I was going to unmute. No, I think I'm covered by what Isabel just put forward. I'm fine for now.
Thanks, Leader. Comrade Kwesi, any reflections from you?
Yes, I think there was a point around North Africa. Yes, we do know that that's a long-standing issue we have on the continent, but they are part of and central part of the African Union. So if we take it from there, they are involved in the process. I think what is left undone is how we as civil society work with our colleagues in North Africa that the governments can't do for us. That is our responsibility. And I think we have to figure out how to build bridges with our brothers and sisters in the north of our continent. Thanks.
Thank you for the questions and thank you for the very insightful responses, colleagues. I want now to move to the next session of this webinar, which is really just getting reflections from our partners who are doing work on the ground and engaged with the people that we claim to want to bring into these conversations, right? And the questions that I'm going to invite you to answer, comrades, is really your reflection on what community engagement, meaningful participation looks like in your context. How do we interpret it, and how do we make it a reality in the communities that we work with? And to answer that question, I'm going to start with Comrade Vainola Makan of the Ubuntu Rural Women and Youth Movement. Vainola, over to you, leader.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Nandipa and Oxfam, for the opportunity to have this and participate in this lovely discussion. I think that this is an opportunity, really, that civil society organizations, all our sectors, all the marginalized groups that do not have the opportunity to engage for their voice here. So for me, I would concur with many of the speakers that saying that this is a moment where we can remobilize ourselves, we can reawaken our activism, and we should see this lead up to the G20 as exactly that, and not wait for after G20. So the first assertion I want to make is that we need to have a mind shift around how do we engage with global policy moments. For example, the question we need to answer is, what is our theory for change for participating around the G20? We need to be very clear why we are participating and what will be our theory of change. So I think the consensus so far is that if grassroots communities and civil society participate, it will expand, it will advance and enhance our ability to unite ourselves, to build a critical mass, and to put our interests and needs and priorities on the agenda of that G20. If it doesn't land there, then we have used the opportunity as an expansion of our civic space, which is really under threat. So this is a moment where we can come together, and not only South Africa. This is G20 for the whole of Africa. So it is wonderful to hear that there will be goodwill from the African Union, because the theme this year is also really reparations, and it's important that grassroots communities, rural women and youth are having a say. What must be repaired? We need to be part of that discussion, and that should not be left up to the governments to be. The issue of energy justice and participation of women is really important, because it is one opportunity where there can be job creation, where women can have a say, and they become centralized to the debate instead of being on the periphery. The many wars that we see internationally is a lot about energy and about economics and about power, and we need to make sure that women and grassroots communities are at the center of those debates, in order to make sure that our perspective and our theories of change are running the show there. So the issue of climate justice is also important, and it must be put on the agenda. Why? The combined cost of weather-related disasters between 2000 and 2009 was estimated to be 9.2 billion. Over the past 2 years in South Africa, 80 reported that the disasters have affected over 22 million people and cost over 113 billion. In the first half of 2024, Economic losses from natural disasters in Africa reach around 463 million US dollars. So, comrades, when we do the development on the ground, we sometimes only ask for 2 million and see how many losses we have. And so we need to make sure that these companies that have factories and they're mining and are going wild in extracting profits without looking at what are the impact on poor people and on the global south. They need to really be account, and our communities must say what must be repaired. There's an eco debt, there's a social debt, there's a land debt, there's a health debt, there's a personal debt of people losing families, and so on. So all those things must be looked at. So there's a need for resources for climate literacy. We can't just say add more rural people, add grassroots people. We need to have the commitment to have climate literacy workshops. We need to have the commitment to make sure that they can have the literacy to participate in the new economic order that we want to put there. We need to make sure that we focus on pro-poor, gender-sensitive adaptation, and so on, and building a strong capacity on the ground with the women, with the forest women, with the people in the fisher community and the small-scale farmers. And then we need to make resources available for them to talk to each other as well. The conversation must not only happen among the ministerial community, it must also happen on the ground, and that resources must be given. So with the social vulnerability of women and grassroots people, for example, also the destruction of cropland in the Eastern Cape, thousands of crops has been lost, and women have been painstakingly planted them, with love and knowing that they can feed their families and their communities. Climate has come and just washed it away, and now they have to start afresh. And so those things must get first priority. The other issues are agriculture and food security, forest and biodiversity, water and sanitation. And I would propose that we take the example of Brazil. Out of all the many laundry list of issues, they put food security on the agenda and came to us and say, this is our non-negotiable. We should now expand that and say food security, energy justice, just agriculture, and climate justice. Those are our non-negotiable, and that is in the context of inequality and poverty alleviation. So we should have a few issues that we say and put on the table, and we fight for it. That is what we're going to take to America, and this is our non-negotiables. So the other issues are who's leading our movements. Are we giving opportunity for our grassroots communities to lead? What about issues such as environmental racism? Are we putting those things on the agenda? Economic racism, patriarchal racism, billionaire racism, which is running the show at the moment. How do we make sure that we build a united Africa where we do not alienate our sisters and brothers from the other countries as well? So this for me is an opportunity for us to expand and to put our issues on the agenda. Yeah, even gender-based violence, which is seen as a soft economic issues, it must be linked to climate disasters. It must be linked to food, agriculture, land access, because that is at the heart of gender-based violence. And so let not us see this as a big ministers' meeting. There are majority men, but our feminist issues must therefore be on there. And we shouldn't go for a minimalist demand, because when you want 600,000 rand, and you are asking for 600,000, you're going to come back with 300,000. So let's ask for double. Let's ask for our maximum demand. And then given the kind of meeting that this is the richest countries of the world, the capitalist elite of the world, we are also realistic that we are not going to get all our maximum demands, but we need to put them on the table so that when we come back from there, we have advanced our interests, we have advanced our building of our movement, and we have relationships with people from the global south and people from the rest of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Comrade Vainola. That was to the point and quite clear. Thank you so much. We will talk about how we take those things forward as we continue with this G20 conversation. I want to invite Comrade Thandi Hopper, who is an agroecologist activist, a farmer, a leader in East London, in the Eastern Cape, for her reflections on what really this moment means and what community participation and meaningful engagement looks like. Sis Thandi, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity as we think of the families currently in the Eastern Cape, mostly in Mthatha, who are displaced. We know that water is life, but when you have too much water, then it causes problems. And as an organization, we're also trying to see what we can do to assist those displaced communities there. But moving to what we are all about today, the organization that we work for is Green River Band Programs. It's an NPO that is committed to transforming food systems through agroecology, equity, and community-driven solutions. So what we do is to amplify the voices of small farmers, advocate for policies that will ensure sustainability and justice, and we empower those communities to build resilient, inclusive food networks. So what does then the G20 then means for us? It means we need to engage with these communities to make sure that everyone understands what the G20 means for them. In their own language, have it translated into what they are currently doing and how it affects, their involvement into the G20. So we said that we need to, as a step, I'm happy that Comrade Jafta and other colleagues alluded to the issue of having dialogues, because that is what we're currently planning. And the focus will be on small-scale farmers to talk about really what are the issues that are affecting them and how then do we take those issues to the G20 working groups on agriculture to make sure that we advocate for them to be able to influence the policy. We are saying that we want to ensure that even the small-scale farmers that are willing to transition to sustainable agriculture practices understand what that means for them, how then it affects the global system. So also for our community, I think that the participation into the G20 deliberations entails that we also extend our training programs on sustainable agriculture, and as civil society organizations have a united voice to strengthen small-scale farmers to be able to input the policies, and also try to leverage platforms as we are currently doing to advance our work in supporting the interests of the farmers. And I think also what is important for us as the organization in our community, especially in the Eastern Cape as an agricultural province, is to collaborate with the organizations and the likes of the Oxfam community and different funders out there. I think also government has a role to play. That is why it's important for us to be part of those discussions in those spaces, because we want to contribute meaningfully in transforming systems that perpetuate poverty. I think I liked the idea that, the issue that Isabel talked to about G20 tracking, because for us as an organization, it means that we need to be able to assess how the G20 policies and decisions affect small-scale farmers and the local communities. And this is across the board. It affects everyone and it involves everyone, women, youth, people with disabilities. And fortunately for us as an organization, we have a youth desk. And we have seen from the chats that there are organizations that are asking for collaboration for the youth sector, because what we mostly advocating is that we engage youth in agriculture, and they must understand what the G20 is all about. Because I think honestly, when we talk to communities on the ground, they don't understand. They just see that everyone is talking about the G20, but what is that for them? how can they contribute meaningfully into that? And also for us, it's important as a community to understand the concerns that everyone has and be able to put their priorities where in the relevant working group with regards to the G20. I think I don't want to spend most time, but I think what is important then for the meeting is to just put a call out there for collaboration. We would welcome collaboration with other organizations that want to do the same. As we have already said that we're starting with the G20 dialogues at community level, at grassroots level, to ensure that people are aware and are able to contribute meaningfully to those. And we're also open to share best experiences. We don't want to say best practices. Let we say best experiences in communicating with the communities. I think let me leave it there.
Thank you so much, Sis Thandi. That was quite helpful and very clear. Thank you. I mean, around questions of collaborations, the need for funding, the need to make the G20 really to bring it to the people and use people's language really to engage on what this G20 means, and the contribution of small-scale farmers into transforming food systems. Those are conversations that we're very keen as Oxfam South Africa to engage on. But colleagues, maybe we can use this moment to speak to a few things, maybe in terms of the way forward that we see for ourselves as a sector and really as comrades as Oxfam South Africa. This conversation for us really sets the tone for our G20 roadshows that we are planning to do. And as you might have heard from our partners like Sis Thandi, for instance, that we've reached out to a few partners to say, we want to bring the conversation around the G20 to people that are impacted, by all these challenges that have been surfaced in this conversation. And we know that, we can't come into a community, parachute in and say we are having a conversation. This is why we have partners, that are rooted and are doing work in communities. And the road shows for us are a way to connect, with communities. And we are really dependent on our partners to say, how do we interpret the conversation in your context? Of course, we bring materials that we have developed and we are currently in the process of developing with our partner, the Institute for Economic Justice. And we are really looking for collaborations with our partners. How do we talk about the G20 moment in ways that make sense in your community? How do we interpret, the difficult conversations that are happening up there in ways that make sense at community level? And how do we explore partnership? We have spoken to a few of you. We are happy to engage further to those that are interested. The hope is that we will go to about 7 provinces. And that number keeps growing, but we will see. But the important point that we want to communicate in this fora is that, like I said in the beginning, we see ourselves as Oxfam South Africa as really a party that facilitates conversation, facilitates participation of our partners in spaces that, they wouldn't otherwise have access to. We are not seeking to occupy those spaces ourselves, although we have our own agenda and that we are pushing with our inequality campaign and other work that are happening behind the scenes. But how do we facilitate, the centering of voices that are always pushed to the margin? I think Comrade Vainola referred to that. How do we move Black working class women from the margins into the center? And how do we begin to use their lens to interpret the moment? And that can only happen if we're in conversation with those people on the ground. And the G20 community roadshows are our way of contributing to that, to say, let's make it real, and the theme that we are using for this work is towards a people's G20. And we are very open to co-creating those spaces with our partners. How do we what does a road show in your community look like that speaks to the G20? And while we have our 4 thematic areas that we want to explore with the materials within these conversations, what are the key burning issues that the communities we work with want to surface, the space for that, the space to co-create and really just choreograph this conversation and the moment and the build up to the People's Summit together. Yeah, that is what we are doing, and I've been seeing in the chat that there's a lot of people that are interested. Please reach out to me to see how we bring the conversation to your community. How do we identify policy gaps that are identified by people, everyday people, and how do we then take those and bring them to the G20 conversations? Thank you. That is how we are taking it forward. So, Mamlebu, the questions around rural women and rural people and the engagement in the conversation, this is how we are bringing everybody in. And let's engage in terms of how we bring that to life in those communities. Comrade Carlos, I see you're back. Please go ahead, Tata. Thank you.
Good day to the comrades, ladies, youth, veterans, and everyone. Kalina la Morena, Jesu ke a le dumedisa kaofela. No, it's been an quite interesting journey since we started earlier on up until now. A lot of comrades, they have said mouthful things, and the thing is, all of us, we are all having the same disease. So it seems like we all need the same medicine, because we all say the community, there must be an inclusivity, but majority of those people that we talk about, are they given the platform to express themselves, or are they having a proper way to engage? Are we not threatening them? Are we giving them a correct platform to engage? Saying this, it's because we've been engaging a lot about most of the things, G20, just energy transition, climate change, but how far are we to take the information up until we reach to everyone, even the marginalized people? Are they getting the right information, or they are not getting the proper information? Just to introduce myself, colleagues, my name is Carlos Vilankulu. I'm the chairperson of NIA Community Foundation. I'm based in Mpumalanga at a place called Komati Village, next to the power station. Colleagues, we are looking forward about the roadshow and believing that this roadshow, it will be a first thing to break the bigger sizes into a small sizes, so that everyone can understand proper what the G20 is all about. Because if you can check, most of the people, they only think that it's a group of 20 countries that must come together and discuss about the economy and all that. But do we really understand that we are also part and parcel of this, and what are the policies that comes with the G20? And how do we take this information so that the community can engage and also put something so that everyone can understand? Now we are expecting G20. How far are we with sharing the information about the climate change? How far are we with sharing the information about the just energy transition? Like, do we really do a proper way to call everyone so that they understand everything? That is a question we always ask ourselves. But hoping that if we can be together with the civil society, because the only time where we get full information is when we engage more into the community. And the only people who does that better, it's the civil society, because they believe in going deep to the rurals and making sure that everyone's voice is heard accordingly. For example, if we say that we want people to participate in G20, how are we going to structure it? Are we going to go into deeper to the rurals, or are we just going to stay somewhere in the suburbs and engage only with them? That's the question that everyone is expected to ask, because most of the people that we must engage with are the people that they don't even have anything. They don't even have a transport. How are we going to get them to come closer to us? So by saying this, I believe that the roadshow, it can reach even deeper. Let us not go to a places where everyone is expected, the high people is expected, but let us try to go deeper and make sure that the voice from the women, they are heard, the voice from the youth, they are heard, the voice from the males, they are also heard, because everyone, they are having problems. And especially about this one, there's something that we can learn. There's something that we can benefit if we can only find a way to communicate to everyone and get to the people so that they can understand. Not so long, like we had a workshop with Indalo. They did a survey there. And the survey, it showed that 50%, even now, they don't understand what's happening about just energy transition. What is a climate change? So this, it should be something that tells us that when we try to engage the community, let us go there prepared. Let's make sure if there must be someone to translate, let them translate so that everyone can be part of it, because without inclusivity, there is no justice. Justice, it should be served to everyone. We mustn't only use the bigger words. We must make sure that we give people enough information so that they can be able to express themselves and understand everything. So this G20, I'm also looking forward to it. There's a lot to learn. As I saw from when we started the history of the G20 and everything, now it's coming back again. Hopefully this time I will also be part of it, at least to give something and also to learn something, and to make sure that I contribute by calling everyone so that they can come and express them. But it shouldn't only focus only to the G20. Let it be a little bit broad so that people can understand, because G20 is the umbrella, but everything that is below it, let it be understood by the community so that we can all move forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cromate. I mean, those are very important points. My takeaway specifically is that let's use accessible language, right? So that people are able to engage with the information that we need. And that we must be very intentional about taking the conversation even to the most rural of areas. So thank you for that. I don't know if Comrade Mukete was able to join. But I think we are right on time, and I'm going to invite the panelists to do their closing remarks, really just 2 minutes each, and then we can do the way forward, which I've already spoken to briefly. But let's get closing remarks from all our panelists, and then we take it from there. Isobel, I'm going to tap on you first, and then we move to Nkateko, then Comrade Jaha, and then Kwesi.
Thank you so much, Mandisa, and thanks to all comrades who have shared ideas, suggestions, challenges. It just affirms to me exactly why the bulk of Oxfam's G20 work really is focused on our partners and members, because The leadership of different countries are talking to themselves, and as a civil society organization, we really are located in the communities where our members are, and hopefully through the G20 civil society tracking, we'll be able to ensure that in the coming months, we're able to provide partners with information ahead of time to encourage and facilitate their membership. So thank you for your time. I appreciate the time that you've given up to be part of this consultation, that you've taken up out of your day. And again, in closing, just thoughts and prayers to the families in the Eastern Cape. Thank you, Mandisa.
Thanks, Isabel. And Kateko?
Colleagues, once again, I really want to express my deepest gratitude to the comrades on the call for staying with us and taking the journey with us, as well as we navigate and give meaning to the G20 for ourselves, but also for communities who are actually going through these lived experiences on a daily basis. I do want to also reiterate that as Oxfam, our pledge in solidarity is to really facilitate access to spaces for participation. It is also to work with you in ideating and in ensuring that the ownership of the road shows are essentially driven and held at community level, at grassroots level. And so there was a very good point that was left by Ndakwani on the chat, saying, how do we start mapping out our actions as grassroots communities, as civil society organizations, to give more clarity on what is who doing? We've had inputs with youth desks that are mobilizing at community level, but let's give it life. Let it be visible to everyone in the spirit of activating even our values as Oxfam as well, around inclusiveness and solidarity, is really saying, let's develop a tool that helps us know that in Mpumalanga, Carlos and his team and communities are working on pushing the energy transition work. In Limpopo and other spaces, we have Sis Francina really pushing the frontier on the intersections of women's experiences in communities around climate justice issues. So how do we start painting that picture? Colleagues such as Dr. Janet, who are on the call as well, intersect at various levels with building in feminist principles and bringing in mine-affected communities into the discussions. So that for me, Mandisa, as you lead this work, is to say, give us a tool that maps the dialogues that Comrade Jaha, for example, is leading to bring communities into the fold, that maps the work that we are doing as well, so that we know when we start to kick off with the roadshows, we are able to say, in Mpumalanga, we are leaning on Carlos's constituency. What support and infrastructure do we need to go in there to drive our campaign? In KZN and other places, so njalo njalo. So I'm trying to break down how we also create a systemic approach to how we collaborate together, particularly in this moment around the G20. But of more interest for me is consolidating ourselves as civil society, because the G20 goes, I mentioned earlier on, it's a moving circus. It goes to America next year. But what foundations are we leaving behind that help us anchor civil society coordination, collaboration moving forward? So that tool for me, Mandisa, will be a great repository, a great resource that also informs our partnership strategy and approach moving forward. On the aspects mentioned by Comrade Vainola from the Western Cape, it's essential. We also need to break down the structures that really affect the way in which we work together, but also affect the way in which we are starting to engage in issue-based organizing. That's what essentially breaks down movement building, when we start looking at issues for issues for issues. So what are the common themes? What are the cross-cutting issues? And I think with Isabel's presentation around Oxfam's G20 strategy is we sat down and we we thought inequality is actually an intersectional issue. It gives itself expression in our day-to-day realities, no matter what topic you are talking about. The one thing that I loved hearing our board chair say as well was to say, think of it this way. Each time a woman is pregnant, they deliver a baby. The baby needs access to healthcare services. The baby needs access to food and supplements. The baby then grows into a toddler and a young person who then requires access to education. And jalo, as you grow and evolve, you need access to employment, to get a job, to sustain your family, to put bread on the table. So the life cycle of inequality gives itself expression in our lives from the moment that we step onto this earth. And so in that context, I really want us to focus our energy in really strengthening our partnership model, Mandisa, but also being as transparent as possible in sharing information and centrally co-creating the roadshows with the communities we identify, particularly this mapping tool that helps us understand who is sitting where and what are the needs and priorities of the communities. Issues around displacement, food security are all giving itself expression in our G20 strategy and in our inequality.
We lost Comrade Kateko there.
Oh, yes, we did. I was also wondering if it's only on my side. Let us, I think we captured the essence of what she was saying. I want to invite you, Comrade Chaga, for your final reflections, and then we'll come straight to you, Comrade Kwesi.
Thanks, comrades. Thanks to everyone for having taken part in this important platform. Platforms such as these are useful to share information, to sharpen our strategies. I think we've done that. The challenge for us now is to go to the ground, to really get people organized, get people talking, get people generating alternatives, and then preparing for going beyond the summit in December so that we can sustain a people-driven development pathway. I think that's the challenge facing all of us. As the Balaza Pathways Institute, we're ready to work with Oxfam, we're ready to work with communities, with community groups to sustain that kind of effort. Thank you.
Thanks, Comrade Mazibuko. Comrade Kwesi, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I mean, I think I'll just reiterate one point, I think, which was raised by Nkateko earlier, that the G20 and some of the major events happening concurrently actually are all processes, but this offers us an opportunity to plug in and create and prepare the ground for future engagement. And I think for us as Africans, it also provides and creates the space for us to be able to work together beyond the current G20, because I think that we need to use this as a groundswell to build our strength, to engage some of the other processes post-December this year when South Africa hands over to the Americans. Thanks. So I'm looking forward to how we build bridges.
Colleagues, thank you so much. Keteko sends her apologies. She has connection problems. I think her electricity went off. As South Africans, we understand the challenges of electricity that we've been experiencing, especially in Johannesburg. So we understand. Thank you so much, colleagues. This really is a beginning of a conversation to say, how do we shape this moment together? And how do we address the challenges of marginalization of our people from this conversation? And how do we bring those voices together and at the center? I think all of our panelists have spoken to the importance of building solidarity and to the importance of building solidarity beyond our country borders, but also understanding this moment, as a gift that South Africa and Africa gives to this G20 vehicle that is moving, especially as it moves, you know, to a country like the US, where civic space has drastically, you know, shrunk over the past couple of months. So what is it that we want our legacy to be as the G20 moment moves forward? So thank you for those reflections. I am the movement building manager for Oxfam South Africa. So conversations around how we take this to your community, please reach out to me. I will also be reaching out to you in terms of how we co-create and we make these spaces meaningful and enriching, not only for our communities, but for the process, the G20 process itself. So yes, thank you, colleagues. We have come to the end of our engagement. It's the end of this one, but the broader engagement continues until, you know, until we see the change that we want to see. We have come to the end. Thank you for joining us today. Please be on the lookout for communication from me and other members of the programs team. But yeah, thank you so much, comrades. Enjoy your Friday and long weekend.